My sister joked, "You can't even afford a car." Just then, a helicopter landed on the lawn. "My ride's here," I said, and Dad fainted. "I killed a man 3 months ago, and my family still thinks I work at a coffee shop." Let me back up. The helicopter thing? That happened yesterday during Sunday dinner, and it was the moment everything I'd been hiding finally started unraveling. But to understand why my dad hit the floor like a sack of potatoes when that sleek black aircraft touched down on our suburban lawn, you need to know about Marcus Holloway. About what he made me do. About what I became after I put a bullet through his chest. The whole mess started in January. I was 24, broke as a joke, and yeah, my sister Rachel wasn't wrong about the car thing. I'd been taking the bus to my actual job, which wasn't serving lattes, for the record, and living off ramen in my studio apartment downtown. My family thought I was just another struggling millennial trying to make it in Seattle. Classic underachiever Emma, right? Wrong. See, I work for the kind of company that doesn't exist on paper. The kind where your business card says risk assessment consultant but your real job description is more like problem solver for people who can't go to the police. We handle situations that require, let's call it creative resolution. Industrial espionage, witness protection alternatives, corporate leverage disputes. That sort of thing. I'm good at it. Really good. Turns out I have a talent for reading people, for slipping into spaces I shouldn't be, for making problems disappear without leaving fingerprints. Literally or metaphorically. But Marcus Holloway was different. He wasn't supposed to be a problem that needed permanent solving. The briefing seemed routine when my handler, David Chen, laid it out for me at our usual spot, a dim corner booth at Pike Place Market where the fish-throwing noise covered our conversation. Marcus was a mid-level pharmaceutical executive who'd been skimming research data and selling it to competitors. Our client wanted him discredited, maybe prosecuted, definitely neutralized as a business threat. Standard corporate takedown, David said, sliding a manila envelope across the sticky table. Gather evidence, build a case, let the system handle him. I remember the way the ice in his coffee clinked against the glass. Such an ordinary sound for such an extraordinary lie. Because Marcus wasn't just stealing data. He was selling something much worse. The first red flag came when I broke into his home office in Bellevue. This guy lived in a glass palace overlooking Lake Washington, all clean lines and expensive art that screamed new money. Getting inside was almost too easy. Security system from 2018, locks that yielded to my picks like butter, motion sensors I could have disabled blindfolded. But what I found in his files made my blood freeze. Clinical trial data. Not the sanitized reports that get submitted to the FDA, but the raw numbers. The real numbers. For a drug called Nurex that was supposed to treat childhood epilepsy. Only according to Marcus's private documents, it wasn't treating anything. It was causing massive brain hemorrhages in 17% of test subjects. Kids. We're talking about kids. And Marcus knew. He'd been feeding the fake, cleaned up data to the FDA while selling the real results to competitors who wanted to use the information to short the pharmaceutical company's stock. Making millions while children died in clinical trials. I sat there in his sterile office, surrounded by his awards and family photos, reading page after page of horror. Test subjects identified only by numbers, but the ages were right there. 7 years old. 9. 12. Subject 847 experienced massive cerebral hemorrhaging at 0300 hours. Parents were told it was an allergic reaction to food coloring in the hospital cafeteria. Subject 322 suffered complete neurological shutdown during week 3 of treatment. Family informed that a pre-existing condition had been discovered. Page after page. Lie after lie. All in Marcus's neat, clinical handwriting. That's when I heard the garage door. Marcus was supposed to be in Portland for a conference. I confirmed his hotel reservation, tracked his credit card charges at dinner near the convention center just 3 hours earlier. But there he was, his BMW purring into the garage beneath me. I had maybe 60 seconds to clean up and get out. I shoved the files back where I'd found them, killed the desk lamp, and slipped toward the back door. But my hands were shaking, actually shaking, and I fumbled the lock reset. Footsteps on the stairs. The back door was my only option, but it opened onto a floodlit patio that connected to his neighbor's yard. If anyone was looking out their window, I'd be completely exposed. But Marcus's office lights had just flicked on, and I could hear him moving around, probably checking to see if anything had been disturbed. I made it to the tree line at the back of his property when I heard him call out. "I know someone's been here." His voice carried across the night air, calm and confident. Not the voice of someone who'd just discovered a break-in. The voice of someone who'd been expecting one. "Emma?" My blood turned to ice water. He knew my name. Somehow, this man I'd never met knew exactly who I was. Emma Martinez, 24, born in Tacoma, graduated from UW with a degree in criminology. Currently employed by Sentinel Risk Management, though I doubt that's what you tell your family. I press myself against a massive Douglas fir, bark scratching through my jacket, and try to control my breathing. The LED motion sensors on his patio swept back and forth like mechanical eyes searching for prey. I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most people would have taken the job at face value. Corporate espionage, gather some evidence, build a case. But you found the real files, didn't you? The ones about the children. He was walking closer now, his voice carrying easily through the trees. Casual. Conversational. Like we were discussing the weather. Here's what's going to happen, Emma. You're going to come back to the house, and we're going to have a chat about your future. Because what you found tonight, those files about Nurex, that's just the beginning. And if you think you can walk away from this, if you think you can just report back to David Chen and pretend you never saw those numbers. He laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. Well, let's just say I know a lot more about you than your name and your job. I know about your sister Rachel and her daughter Sophie. I know about your parents' house on Mercer Island, the one with the lovely garden and the white picket fence. I know your father just had his heart surgery last month and your mother volunteers at the Children's Hospital downtown. The threat was crystal clear, wrapped in that same conversational tone. I had two choices, face him now, or spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder while he made my family disappear one by one. I walked back to the house. Marcus was waiting on his patio with 2 glasses of wine, like we were old friends meeting for drinks. He was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'8", with thinning brown hair and the kind of soft face that belonged in middle management, not criminal conspiracy. The kind of man you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. That should have been my second warning. Memorable people don't survive long in this business. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. The Malbec is excellent. Argentine. Cost me more than most people make in a month. I stayed standing. What do you want? Direct. I like that. He sipped his wine, studying me over the rim. What I want is for you to understand the situation you've stumbled into. Those files you read tonight? Nurex is already in phase 3 trials. FDA approval is expected within 6 months. By this time next year, thousands of children will be taking this drug. Unless someone stops it. Unless someone stops it, he agreed. Which brings us to our problem. You see, I'm not the villain in this story, Emma. I'm the whistleblower. He set down his glass and leaned forward, his expression shifting from casual to intense. I've been gathering evidence for months. Everything you saw tonight, I've been documenting meticulously. Names, dates, cover-ups, falsified reports. But going to the authorities isn't an option. The company has people everywhere, FDA, DEA, Congress. If I surface with this information through normal channels, I'll be dead within a week and the evidence will disappear. So you're selling it to competitors instead? I'm creating leverage. His voice hardened. Every pharmaceutical company in America wants to see Zenith Corp fail. If they know Nurex is going to kill children, they'll use that information to destroy the company from the inside. Short the stock, leak selective details to journalists, pressure the FDA to reopen the trials. The drug gets pulled, the children live, and Zenith pays for what they've done. It sounded almost reasonable. Almost. Except for one crucial detail. And you make millions in the process. He shrugged. I'm risking everything. Why shouldn't I be compensated? Because children are dying right now, while you play stock market games. Children are dying because Zenith is rushing an untested drug to market. I'm the only person in a position to stop them. He stood up, pacing to the edge of the patio. But I need time. 6 more weeks to gather the rest of the evidence, to coordinate with the right people, to make sure this brings down the entire operation instead of just getting me killed. What does this have to do with me? Your employer wants me discredited. Probably wants me arrested on corporate espionage charges, which would bury the Nurex evidence forever. I can't let that happen. The pieces were starting to click together. David Chen's vague briefing. The almost too easy break-in. Marcus knowing my name. This whole thing was a setup. Not a setup. A test. He turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw something like desperation in his eyes. I needed to know if you were just another corporate soldier following orders, or if you were someone who could see the bigger picture. Someone who could help me save those kids. By doing what? By going back to David Chen and telling him you found nothing. Standard corporate malfeasance, maybe some tax evasion, nothing worth pursuing. Buy me 6 weeks to finish gathering evidence, and I'll make sure you're richly rewarded when this all comes out. He named a figure that would have paid off my student loans and bought me a house. Cash. And if I refuse? His expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. Then you become a loose end. And loose ends have a way of disappearing, along with anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions about where they went. I looked at this ordinary-looking man in his expensive house, with his wine and his casual threats, and realized I was in deeper water than I'd ever imagined. But I also realized something else. He was scared. All the bravado, all the careful planning, underneath it, Marcus Holloway was terrified. Which meant he was vulnerable. I need to think about it. You have until tomorrow night. Meet me here at 8, and we'll discuss the details. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And Emma? Don't try to run. I told you, I know where to find you. I left through the front door this time, like a guest departing after a pleasant evening. But my mind was racing, cataloging everything I'd learned and everything I still didn't know. Because Marcus might have been telling the truth about Nurex. The files I'd seen were definitely real, and 17% mortality rate in pediatric trials was beyond horrifying. But I'd been doing this job long enough to recognize a manipulator when I saw one. And everything about Marcus's story felt carefully constructed to push exactly the right emotional buttons. The dying children. The corrupt corporation. The lone whistleblower fighting against impossible odds. Either he was telling the truth, or he was very good at lying. I spent the next day trying to figure out which. David Chen met me at a different location this time, a coffee shop in Capitol Hill that catered to the kind of people who paid $12 for artisanal pour-overs. He looked nervous, which wasn't like him. David had been my handler for 2 years, and I'd never seen him ruffled by anything. Tell me you got what we need, he said before I'd even sat down. I got something. Not sure if it's what you're looking for. I gave him the cleaned-up version. Corporate espionage, some financial irregularities, nothing actionable. Standard middle management corruption. But I watched his face while I talked, looking for tells. David Chen was many things, but he wasn't a good actor. And right now, he looked like a man who'd just been handed terrible news. That's it? Nothing about pharmaceutical trials? Nothing about FDA submissions? There it was. David knew about Nurex. Which meant either he was part of whatever Marcus was really doing, or our mysterious client had left out some crucial details about why they wanted Marcus Holloway neutralized. Should there be? No. No, of course not. But he was already reaching for his phone, probably texting someone who wasn't going to be happy with my report. Good work, Emma. Take a few days off. We'll have another assignment for you next week. He left without finishing his coffee. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was about to become the loose end Marcus had warned me about. That night, I went back to his house. Not because I believed his story, not because I trusted him, but because he was the only person who seemed willing to tell me what was really happening. Even if half of it was lies. Marcus was waiting with dinner this time. Thai takeout on his expensive dining room table, like we were old friends catching up. But I noticed he'd chosen a seat that put his back to the wall and gave him clear sight lines to all the entrances. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either. I sat down across from him, but didn't touch the food. Tell me about David Chen. Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Relief? Your handler? He's been feeding information to Zenith for months. Every corporate espionage case that threatens their interests, every whistleblower who gets too close to sensitive information. Chen makes sure those problems go away. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious problem. He opened a laptop and turned it toward me. Financial records. Chen's been receiving payments from a shell company called Pacific Risk Solutions. $50,000 a month for the last year. Pacific Risk is owned by another shell company, which is owned by another shell company, which eventually traces back to Zenith Corporation. The records look legitimate, but financial documents were easy to forge. Still, it would explain David's nervous behavior and his specific questions about pharmaceutical trials. Assuming this is true, what's your play? Simple. You go back to Chen and tell him you found evidence that I've been selling trade secrets. Enough to build a criminal case, enough to get me arrested. But you tell him you need more time to gather everything together, maybe another week. That keeps me alive and gives you time to verify what I've told you about Nurex. And then? Then you decide who you want to be. The person who follows orders and lets children die, or the person who stops this. He was good, I had to admit. Every word perfectly calculated to make me feel like saving him was saving innocent lives. But I'd noticed something while he was talking. The laptop he'd shown me wasn't connected to the internet. The financial records he displayed were local files, created locally, with no external verification. And the metadata showed they'd been created just yesterday, the day after he discovered me in his office. Marcus Holloway was definitely lying about something. But David Chen was probably lying too. I need to make a phone call, I said. Of course. Use the kitchen if you want privacy. I stepped into his pristine kitchen and dialed a number I'd memorized but never used. Emergency contact for situations that had gone sideways beyond normal protocols. Phoenix Industries, this is Maria. This is Nightingale 7. I need to speak with Control. Please hold. Phoenix Industries was the parent company that owned Sentinel Risk Management, which employed David Chen, which employed me. But Phoenix was more than just a corporate umbrella. They were the people you called when situations required resources that didn't officially exist. Nightingale 7. The voice on the line was electronically distorted, but I recognized the cadence. Control was someone I'd spoken to exactly 3 times in 2 years, and only when jobs had gone seriously wrong. Report. I have a situation with handler Chen and target Holloway. I believe both parties have provided false information about the nature of this assignment. Specify. I gave him everything. Marcus's claims about Nurex, David's suspicious behavior, the financial records that didn't quite add up. Control listened without interruption, which was somehow more unnerving than questions would have been. Instructions as follows, he said when I finished. Maintain contact with both parties. Gather additional intelligence on the pharmaceutical situation. Prepare for termination order. My blood chilled. Termination of which party? To be determined. Continue surveillance until further notice. The line went dead. I stood in Marcus's kitchen, holding a silent phone, and realized that everyone in this situation was playing a game I didn't understand. Marcus knew more about me than he should. David was reporting to people who weren't my real employers. And Control was giving me orders that sounded suspiciously like I was about to be ordered to kill someone. Everything all right? Marcus called from the dining room. Fine, I called back. But my hand was already moving to the concealed holster under my jacket. Not because I was planning to shoot him, but because I was finally starting to understand that this situation was about to become very dangerous very quickly. When I returned to the dining room, Marcus was reading something on his phone, and his expression had changed completely. The carefully constructed calm was gone, replaced by something that looked like panic. We have a problem, he said without looking up. David Chen just submitted an expedited request to have you transferred to a different case. Effective immediately. How do you know that? Because I've been monitoring Sentinel's internal communications for months. And because your replacement just received orders to neutralize any loose ends related to this assignment. He turned his phone toward me, and I saw what looked like an encrypted message thread. The details were vague, but the implication was clear. Someone wanted me off this case, and they wanted anyone who knew too much about Marcus Holloway to disappear. This could be fabricated, I said. It could be. But are you willing to bet your life on it? That's when we heard the cars. Multiple vehicles, pulling into Marcus's driveway with the kind of coordinated precision that screamed professional operation. I moved to the front window and saw 4 black SUVs arranged in a tactical formation that would prevent anyone from leaving the property. Back door? I asked. They'll have it covered. Marcus was already moving, not toward an exit but toward a wall safe hidden behind an abstract painting. He worked the combination quickly, revealing what looked like enough firearms to outfit a small army. You want to tell me why you have a personal armory? Because I've been preparing for this moment for months. He handed me a tactical vest and a pistol I recognized as military issue. The question is whether you're going to help me survive it, or whether you're going to let them kill us both. The front door exploded inward. The next few minutes were chaos. Professional operators in tactical gear, moving through the house with practiced efficiency. But Marcus's preparations were better than I'd expected. He'd reinforced the dining room, turned it into a defensive position with clear sight lines and limited access points. We held them off for maybe 10 minutes. Long enough for me to realize that these weren't David Chen's people. Wrong gear, wrong tactics, wrong approach. These were military contractors, the kind of people who got called in when a situation needed to be resolved with extreme prejudice. Who are they? I shouted over the gunfire. Zenith's cleanup crew, Marcus replied, changing magazines with practiced efficiency. I told you they had people everywhere. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I believed him. Not because his story made perfect sense, not because I trusted him completely, but because the people trying to kill us were definitely not the good guys. Whatever Marcus had done, whatever he was really guilty of, the response was disproportionate. And disproportionate responses usually meant someone was trying to hide something big. The battle lasted another 20 minutes. When it was over, 6 men were dead, and Marcus Holloway was bleeding out on his expensive marble floor. The files, he whispered, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. Everything about Nurex. Hidden server in the basement, password is Sophie's birthday. I don't know Sophie's birthday. Your niece. Rachel's daughter. I told you. I know everything about your family. Even dying, he was manipulating me. But his blood was spreading across the floor, and his eyes were losing focus, and I realized he was about to take whatever he knew to the grave. October 15th, I said. He nodded weakly. 2018. The files. Everything's there. Stop them. Then he died. I found the server exactly where he'd said it would be. Password worked on the first try. And what I found there made my hands shake worse than they had during the firefight. Marcus hadn't been lying about Nurex. If anything, he'd undersold how bad it was. 17% mortality rate in the trials, but that was just the immediate deaths. Long-term neurological damage was closer to 60%. Children who'd been normal, healthy kids before the trials were now suffering seizures, memory loss, motor function problems. And Zenith knew. They'd known from the beginning. But Nurex represented a billion-dollar market, and they decided the profit was worth the risk. Marcus had been trying to stop them. But he hadn't been selling the information to competitors. He'd been trying to get it to journalists, to FDA investigators who weren't on Zenith's payroll, to anyone who could force the trials to stop. The financial records showing payments to David Chen were real too. Along with records showing similar payments to FDA officials, congressional staffers, and half a dozen other people in positions to suppress inconvenient information about pharmaceutical safety. I sat in Marcus's basement, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, and realized I had a choice to make. I could take the files to control and let Phoenix Industries decide what to do with them. But Phoenix might be compromised too. There was no way to know how deep Zenith's influence reached. Or I could do what Marcus had been trying to do. Take the information public, damn the consequences. But first, I had to survive the next few hours. The tactical team was gone, but they'd be back with reinforcements once they realized I wasn't among the bodies. I had maybe an hour to get out of the house and disappear before Zenith's cleanup crews arrived to sanitize the scene. I copied everything from Marcus's server onto encrypted drives, then triggered the system's self-destruct sequence. By the time anyone found the basement, there would be nothing left but melted plastic and silicon. Then I called David Chen. Emma? Thank God. We heard there was an incident at Holloway's house. Are you all right? I'm fine. But Marcus is dead, along with most of the evidence we were looking for. I could hear the relief in his voice. What happened? Home invasion. Looks like someone beat us to him. Probably competitors who didn't want him talking. Any indication of what he might have been involved in? Nothing concrete. Some financial irregularities, maybe some patent theft. But whoever hit the house was thorough. They took everything. All right. Come in tomorrow morning for debrief. Take the rest of the week off after that. David hung up, probably congratulating himself on a problem solved. But I wasn't going to make it that easy. I spent the next 3 weeks becoming someone else. New identity, new appearance, new location. The encrypted drives went to 3 different investigative journalists, a whistleblower organization, and an FDA inspector who Marcus's files indicated was still clean. The story broke on a Tuesday. Pharmaceutical giant knowingly tested deadly drug on children, the headlines read. The articles detailed everything Marcus had died trying to expose. The falsified trial data, the bribery, the cover-ups that had reached into Congress and the FDA. Zenith's stock price crashed overnight. The CEO was arrested. Nurex was pulled from trials immediately, and criminal charges were filed against 17 executives and government officials. Including David Chen, who turned out to be just one small part of a much larger conspiracy. But the story that made the front page didn't mention Marcus Holloway. As far as the world knew, the information had come from an anonymous whistleblower inside Zenith. Marcus's death was reported as a home invasion, one of those random tragedies that happen in upscale neighborhoods. Only I knew he'd died trying to save children he'd never met. Which brings us back to yesterday. Sunday dinner at my parents' house on Mercer Island, 3 months after I'd disappeared from my old life and started over. My family still thought I worked at a coffee shop because that's what I told them when I resurfaced with a new apartment and a sudden ability to pay my bills on time. Rachel was still giving me grief about my lack of transportation, and my parents were still worried I'd never get my life together. Emma, honey, you're 24, my mother was saying as she passed the mashed potatoes. Don't you think it's time to start thinking about your future? Maybe go back to school, find a career with some stability? Mom, I'm fine. The coffee shop is working out great. Rachel snorted. Right. You can't even afford a car. How is that working out great? That's when we heard the sound. A deep, rhythmic thumping that made the windows rattle and sent the neighbors' dogs into a frenzy. Everyone stopped eating and looked toward the front of the house, where something large and mechanical was getting closer. Is that? My father started. The helicopter, sleek, black, and definitely not civilian, settled onto our front lawn with military precision. The Phoenix Industries logo was small but visible on the side, along with a registration number I recognized. "My ride's here," I said, standing up from the table. That's when Dad fainted. He recovered quickly, but the questions came fast and frantic. Where was I going? Who owned the helicopter? What kind of coffee shop had military contractors for transportation? "I can't really explain right now," I said, grabbing my jacket from the hall closet. "But I'll be back in a few days and we'll talk." "Emma, what's going on?" Rachel demanded. "This is insane. People don't just get picked up by helicopters for normal jobs." "You're right," I said. "They don't." The pilot was someone I'd never seen before, but he handed me a tablet with orders from control. New assignment, high priority, wheels up in 5 minutes. Someone in South America was developing a bioweapon, and I was being sent to convince them to stop. Or to make sure they couldn't continue. I looked back at my family's house as we lifted off. My mother was standing in the doorway, my father was sitting on the front steps with his head in his hands, and Rachel was recording the whole thing with her phone. They'd have questions I couldn't answer and suspicions I couldn't address. But they'd be safe, which was what mattered. The Phoenix Industries helicopter landing on our lawn was a message to anyone who might be watching. This family was protected by people with serious resources and a willingness to use them. As Seattle fell away beneath us, I thought about Marcus Holloway and the choice he'd made to risk everything for children he'd never met. About David Chen and the choice he'd made to sell those children's lives for money. About the choice I'd made to become someone who could stop people like David Chen. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "When you get back, we're having a very long conversation about your coffee shop job." I smiled and typed back, looking forward to it. But first, I had work to do. Somewhere in Colombia, a man was playing with diseases that could kill millions. And I was the person being sent to make sure he stopped. Just like Marcus had tried to stop Zenith. Just like I'd stopped Marcus's killers. The cycle continues, but at least now I know which side I'm on. The helicopter banked south, and I settled in for the long flight to whatever came next. In my bag, I still carried copies of Marcus's files, insurance against the day when Phoenix Industries might decide I knew too much about their operations. Because I'd learned something important in Marcus Holloway's house that night. In this business, everyone lies. Everyone manipulates. Everyone has an agenda. The trick is making sure your agenda includes protecting the people who can't protect themselves. Even if it means your family thinks you work at a coffee shop. Even if it means you become the kind of person who gets picked up by black helicopters. Even if it means you have to live with the knowledge that sometimes, good people die while bad people profit from their deaths. I killed a man 3 months ago, and my family still thinks I work at a coffee shop. But tomorrow, they're going to start asking questions I won't be able to answer with lies. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's time for them to know who I really am. But first, I had to survive Colombia. The briefing packet on the tablet made for grim reading during the 6-hour flight. Dr. Alejandro Vaz, former biochemist for the CDC, current freelance bioweapons developer. He'd gone off the grid 18 months ago after being terminated for ethical violations that the CDC wouldn't specify. Intelligence suggested he'd been approached by 3 different terrorist organizations and at least one hostile nation-state. His current project was something called hemorrhagic syndrome X, a engineered virus that combined the lethality of Ebola with the transmission rate of influenza. Conservative estimates suggested it could kill 40% of the global population within 2 years if released. Target is holed up in a compound outside Medellin, the pilot told me through the headset as we crossed into Colombian airspace. Former drug lord's estate, completely isolated, heavily fortified. Getting in won't be the problem. Getting out will be? Getting out alive will be. The compound sat on a hilltop overlooking the Magdalena River, surrounded by triple layers of security fencing and enough armed guards to staff a small military base. But wealth and paranoia had made Dr. Vaz predictable. Rich men with dangerous secrets always made the same mistakes. They trusted technology more than people. They relied on systems they didn't understand. And they never considered that their greatest vulnerabilities might come from the luxuries they refused to give up. Dr. Vaz had a weakness for expensive wine. Specifically, vintage Bordeaux from his private collection, which was shipped monthly from a distributor in Cartagena. The same distributor that had just acquired a new employee with impeccable references and a talent for wine chemistry. Infiltrating the delivery chain took 3 days. Replacing the wine with identical bottles containing a mild sedative took another 2. The hard part wasn't getting the drug past security. Rich people's wine collections were rarely tested for foreign substances. The hard part was making sure I could neutralize the bioweapon before the sedative wore off. I rode into the compound in the back of a climate-controlled wine truck, hidden among cases of 1982 Chateau Latour that cost more than most people's cars. The guards inspected the driver's credentials and checked the delivery manifest, but they didn't search the cargo. Men like Voss didn't pay for security guards who understood the difference between a threat and a wine delivery. The compound was even more paranoid than the intelligence reports had suggested. Motion sensors, thermal cameras, pressure plates under every walkway. But all of that technology was designed to keep people out, not to monitor what happened once they were inside. I waited in the wine cellar until the dinner bell rang, then made my way to the laboratory complex through ventilation shafts that hadn't been cleaned in months. The dust told a story. Dr. Voss employed a full security team, but he was cutting corners on maintenance. Pride and penny pinching, the hallmarks of a man who thought money could solve any problem. The lab was a contradiction in terms, cutting-edge equipment crammed into a space that looked like it had been converted from a stable. Biosafety protocols that would have impressed the CDC, implemented in a building that probably wasn't up to local fire codes. And there, in a containment unit that hummed with filtered air and UV sterilization, were 17 vials of hemorrhagic syndrome X. Enough to end civilization. Dr. Voss had been careless in other ways too. His computer was protected by military-grade encryption, but his notebook, actual paper and pen, like some kind of mad scientist from a movie, was sitting open on his desk. Pages of handwritten notes detailing the virus's structure, its transmission mechanisms, and most importantly, the locations of the other samples. There were labs in Venezuela, Syria, and North Korea. All of them working from Voss's research, all of them racing to complete their own versions of his bioweapon. I was photographing the notebook when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing the lab in red light that made everything look like a scene from a horror movie. But the containment unit systems were still running. Whatever had happened, it wasn't a complete power failure. Dr. Martinez, I presume. I spun around to find Dr. Voss standing in the doorway, very much awake and pointing a pistol at my chest. He was older than his photos had suggested, with gray hair and the kind of pale complexion that comes from spending too much time indoors. But his hands were steady, and his eyes were alert. The wine was excellent, by the way. 1982 Latour with just a hint of benzodiazepine. Very subtle work. But I've been microdosing myself with various sedatives for months. Occupational hazard when you're working with people who might want to slip something into your drink. Dr. Voss. Please, call me Alejandro. We're both professionals here. He gestured toward the chair near his desk, but kept the gun trained on me. Sit. We have things to discuss. I sat, keeping my hands visible and my body language non-threatening. But I was cataloging escape routes, weapons within reach, and the exact distance between me and the containment unit. You're not what I expected, he said, settling into a chair across from me. When I heard Phoenix Industries was sending someone, I assumed it would be one of their usual military contractors. Someone large and obvious and easy to spot. Disappointed? Intrigued. You're the woman who exposed the Nurex scandal, aren't you? The one who brought down Zenith Corporation. That stopped me cold. My involvement in the Nurex case was supposed to be buried deeper than government secrets. The fact that he knew about it meant his intelligence network was better than our briefing had suggested. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. Marcus Holloway died trying to expose that cover-up, but someone finished what he started. Someone with access to his files, someone with the skills to stay hidden while bringing down a pharmaceutical giant. He smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Someone exactly like you. Assuming you're right, what's your point? My point is that we're on the same side. He holstered his pistol, a show of good faith that I didn't buy for a second, and leaned forward in his chair. Do you know why I was really terminated from the CDC? Not ethical violations. Whistleblowing. I discovered that 3 major pharmaceutical companies were suppressing research into pandemic preparedness because effective treatments would reduce demand for their existing products. So you decided to create a pandemic instead? I decided to create leverage. The same word Marcus had used, but with a different inflection. Every government in the world is ignoring the threat of bioweapons because they think they can control them, manage them, use them as political tools. But they can't control what they don't understand. He gestured toward the containment unit and its 17 vials of apocalypse. Hemorrhagic syndrome X isn't meant to be released. It's meant to be discovered. When intelligence agencies around the world realize that a weapon this devastating can be created by one man in a converted horse stable, they'll be forced to take bioweapon proliferation seriously. And the labs in Venezuela, Syria, and North Korea? His smile faltered slightly. How do you know about those? Your notebook is very thorough. Those are insurance policies. Proof that the technology has already proliferated beyond any possibility of containment. Once the samples here are discovered, those labs will be exposed as well. The shock value will force international cooperation on bioweapon controls. It sounded almost reasonable. Almost. Except for the obvious flaw in his logic. What happens when one of those insurance policies decides to actually use the weapon? They won't. The mortality rate is too high, the transmission too efficient. Any nation that deployed hemorrhagic syndrome X would be committing suicide along with genocide. You're betting the survival of the human species on the rational behavior of terrorist organizations and rogue states. I'm betting it on the self-preservation instinct of people who want to rule the world, not destroy it. That's when I realized Dr. Alejandro Vaz wasn't a criminal mastermind or a bioterrorist. He was something much more dangerous. He was a true believer. True believers were unpredictable because they operated from a moral framework that justified any action in service of their cause. They were also nearly impossible to reason with because they'd already convinced themselves that their extreme measures were not only necessary, but noble. There's another option, I said carefully. Which is? You publish your research openly. Every detail, every formula, every synthesis pathway. Make it impossible for any single actor to monopolize the technology, and make it clear exactly how dangerous this weapon would be. Information wants to be free? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's remarkably naive for someone in your profession. Publishing the research would just accelerate the timeline. Instead of 3 or 4 labs working on versions of this weapon, we'd have 30 or 40 within a year. But we'd also have 30 or 40 labs working on countermeasures. Perhaps. Or perhaps we'd have 30 or 40 labs trying to improve on my design. The philosophical debate was interrupted by an alarm that made my teeth ache. Not a break-in alarm, something much worse. Containment breach, Dr. Vaz said, his face going pale. That's impossible. The system has 17 redundant safety protocols. He was already moving toward the containment unit, and I could see what had triggered the alarm. One of the vials had developed a hairline crack, probably from thermal stress caused by the power fluctuation when the lights went out. How much time do we have? I asked. If the seal fails completely? Maybe 10 minutes before the virus becomes airborne in this room. Maybe 20 before it reaches the ventilation system and spreads to the rest of the compound. Antidote? There is no antidote. That's the point. I looked at the cracked vial, at the man who'd created a weapon that could kill 40% of humanity, at the notebook full of research that could never be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. And I realized that sometimes, there aren't any good choices. Sometimes there are only necessary ones. I'm sorry, I said, and shot him. The bullet took him in the chest, and he went down hard, blood spreading across his lab coat. But he was still conscious, still looking at me with something like respect. The other labs, he whispered. I'll handle them. The samples. I was already moving toward the containment unit, pulling on protective gloves, and checking the integrity of the remaining vials. 16 intact samples of the most dangerous bioweapon ever created, and one that was seconds away from killing everyone in the compound. The emergency protocols were clearly marked. In case of containment breach, trigger the sterilization system and evacuate immediately. UV lights, chemical sprays, and temperatures high enough to denature any organic compound. I hit the emergency button and ran. The sterilization cycle lasted exactly 3 minutes. When it was over, there was nothing left in the containment unit but metal and glass and the lingering smell of ozone. Hemorrhagic syndrome X had been reduced to component atoms. But Dr. Vaz was still alive, barely, when I knelt beside him. The notebook, he gasped. Burn it. I will. The other labs. They don't have a complete formula. Without my research, they can't finish the synthesis. I understand. I was trying. To save the world. I know. He died believing he was a hero. Maybe he was right. Maybe forcing the world to confront the reality of bioweapon proliferation would have prevented some future catastrophe. Or maybe he was just another brilliant man who'd convinced himself that the ends justify the means. I burned his notebook and destroyed his computer, then triggered an explosion that would make the whole thing look like an industrial accident. By the time the authorities arrived, there would be nothing left but rubble and speculation about what the famous Dr. Vaz had really been doing in his secret laboratory. The helicopter picked me up at an extraction point 50 miles from the compound, and I was back in Seattle 12 hours later. My family was waiting with questions I still couldn't answer and suspicions that were probably justified. But the world was a little bit safer than it had been yesterday. And sometimes, that has to be enough. The funny thing about secrets is how they change you. 3 months ago, I was just another struggling millennial trying to make rent. Now I'm someone who kills people to save the world, and my biggest worry is whether my sister will figure out that I don't actually know how to make a cappuccino. Rachel was waiting on my doorstep when I got home, with a kind of determined expression that meant I wasn't getting inside until she got answers. We need to talk, she said. I figured. Military helicopters don't pick people up from coffee shops, Emma. Whatever you're really doing, whatever kind of trouble you're in, I want to help. I looked at my sister, successful lawyer, devoted mother, the kind of person who believed that problems could be solved with a right combination of legal knowledge and stubborn determination, and realized that some secrets were too dangerous to share. I can't tell you everything, I said finally. But I can tell you this, I'm one of the good guys. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. She studied my face for a long moment, looking for something I wasn't sure I wanted her to find. Are you safe? She asked finally. Safer than the alternative. And are you happy? That was a harder question. Was I happy? I was doing work that mattered, using skills I'd never known I had, making a difference in ways that most people couldn't imagine. But I was also lying to everyone I cared about, living a double life that got more complicated every day. I'm useful, I said finally. And right now, that's enough. Rachel hugged me then, the kind of fierce embrace that said she understood more than she was letting on. Just be careful, okay? Whatever you're doing out there, remember that you have people here who love you. I will. And I meant it. Because the truth is, the work I do, the lies I tell, the people I kill, the secrets I keep, all of it is only worthwhile if there's something worth protecting. Something like a sister who worries about me. Parents who still think I need to get my life together. A niece whose birthday can be used as a password by a dying man who knows too much about my family. The world is full of people like Marcus Holloway and Dr. Voss, brilliant minds convinced that their extreme measures are justified by noble goals. Some of them are trying to save children from dangerous drugs. Others are trying to save the world from bioweapons. And some of them are just trying to make sure their families never have to know about the darkness that exists at the edges of the ordinary world. My phone buzzed with another message from Control. New assignment, new location, new problem that needed solving. But first, I was going to have dinner with my parents and pretend to complain about difficult customers at a coffee shop. Because maintaining that fiction, keeping my family safe in their ordinary, wonderful ignorance, was the most important job I'd ever had. Even if it meant living with helicopters on the lawn and questions I couldn't answer. Even if it meant being someone my old self wouldn't recognize. Even if it meant carrying the weight of necessary secrets for the rest of my life. I killed a man 3 months ago, and my family still thinks I work at a coffee shop. And maybe, if I do this job right, they'll never have to know the truth.